On Point is brought to you by National Baking Company.
Good evening and welcome to On Point. I'm your host, Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
Well, this evening a lot to talk about as usual. A lot going on in Venezuela, and we're keeping our eyes, of course, on the Petrocaribe agreement as the country faces political and economic turmoil. On Monday, protesters toppled a statue of the late President Hugo Chavez, and some people are seeing it as a tipping point in Venezuela. Could regime change be in the works? We don't know. We'll talk about that and the implications for Petrocaribe tonight.
And later on in the show, we're going to look at what is the best way to finance tertiary education. It has been a big issue recently, and we're going to speak with two major tertiary institutions on that.
Yes, but before we do that, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories this week.
At number 5. Opposition MP Fitz Jackson has withdrawn his controversial bill to amend the Banking Services Act. However, he says he plans to reintroduce an amended bill in 2 weeks. Mr. Jackson told Parliament he's making the changes because some of the items in the bill have already been fulfilled, such as the study on bank fees. The bill proposes a set of minimum standards that banks must offer customers, including some free services. At number 4. The opposition Free National Movement FNM has swept the general elections in the Bahamas, making party leader Hubert Minnis the country's new prime minister. The FNM won 34 of the 39 seats, while the Progressive Liberal Party PLP retained only 4. 1 seat is still under contention. Outgoing Prime Minister and PLP leader Perry Christie also lost his own seat after serving the constituency for more than 4 decades. Christie is the first Bahamian Prime Minister to lose his seat in a general election. At number 3, they say the grass is greener on the other side, but not if you're Agriculture Minister Carl Samuda. He's accused by his opposition counterpart Dr. Dayton Campbell of personally benefiting from a pilot program for dairy farmers to test out a special type of grass. Campbell says Samuda's dairy farm unfairly benefited, but the minister denies the allegations, saying he offered to pay for the grass, but was given it at the insistence of the chairman of the dairy board. Samuda is also accused of firing the dairy board chairman over a dispute over milk powder. The minister also denies this. At number 2, reports emerged this week that hotel mogul Gordon Butch Stewart was considering selling his iconic Sandals Resorts International. Reuters news agency reported that the company is exploring a potential sale and has hired investment bank Deutsche to look at the options. A brief statement from Sandals says the company is exploring its options to accelerate the company's long-term growth and development plans. And your top business story goes to the land deal between the government and China Harbor Engineering Company, CHEC. CHEC is receiving some 1,200 acres of prime government land in Miami Bay and Caymanas as part compensation for building the north-south link of Highway 2000. But at a recent parliamentary committee meeting, it was claimed that the land was never valued, resulting in several questions about the soundness of the deal. However, opposition leader Dr. Peter Phillips, who was finance minister when the deal was implemented, later refuted this. He says the Miami Bay land is valued at $44 million.
And when we come back, Petrocaribe, Venezuela, and Jamaica, that and more right here on Point. Welcome back. Well, at least 36 people have been killed during protests in Venezuela. Hundreds of thousands of people have been taking to the streets almost daily to protest the poor economic conditions and lack of access to basic food items.
President Nicolas Maduro has been accused of using military coerce against ordinary citizens there. Here's more on that.
An enraged sole government opponent screams at riot police, accusing them of being cowards. They respond by hurling even more tear gas canisters at him from afar. The last 24 hours has seen some of the worst street confrontations in more than a month of non-stop anti-government protests, especially here in Caracas. That's where a 17-year-old musician who played the viola in Venezuela's most prestigious youth orchestra was killed when he was hit in the neck by a still unidentified object. Nearly 400 people, most of them protesters, were injured, suffering from contusions, burns, and smoke inhalation. This is the entrance to one of 3 universities here in Caracas, where students say they will be protesting all day long against the violence that took place during Wednesday's demonstrations. And as you can see, the riot police are already out here in force, prepared for another confrontation. And it didn't take long for the clashes to start. Government opponents are increasing the pressure, at least on the streets, since President Nicolás Maduro responded to their demands for early presidential elections with a decree to rewrite the constitution.
This is a fraud with the only and deliberate objective of avoiding real elections by submerging the country into a constitutional assembly dynamic that they can manipulate as they please.
Adding to tensions, the wife and mother of imprisoned opposition leader Leopoldo López camped out in front of the prison where he was being held, demanding to see him, after rumors spread like wildfire that he had died. The government released a proof-of-life video, but the family is not satisfied.
This proves that Leopoldo has been kidnapped by Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello. They put out this rumor to try to cover up what took place today.
An incident that is further inflaming passions in a political crisis that for both sides has clearly become a battle of resistance. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Caracas.
And we're now joined by former Energy Minister Philip Paulwell and also the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Planning at the University of the West Indies, Professor Denzel Williams. Welcome to On Point.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Let me start with you, Philip. I mean, you were the one who basically oversaw the crafting of the Petrocaribe agreement when you were there. With what's happening in Venezuela now, what sort of threat are we looking at? Because the government has already said they'd have to fork out $39 billion last year. Additional because of the low imports.
To pay for oil up front, yes.
Well, I am truly sorry to see what is happening in Venezuela, and we do wish them well. Yes. The Venezuelan government and people have been very generous to member states of Petrocaribe, and you're right, I was there in 2005 when we signed the agreement. And I just want to make one point clear, because I think there's still some confusion as to what the agreement was. It is a concessionary financing arrangement. The price of oil that we purchase is the world market price, so we do not get any benefit in the price of oil.
There's no discount.
There's no discount. Right. It's just the discount that we get, and we are able to utilize that to the Petrocaribe Development Fund. So, for example, in 2005, the price of crude was $60. We retained 40% of that and paid 60%. So it means that, and this is where the additional benefit comes now, that the foreign exchange that you would normally pay up front,
we don't have to find that.
We wouldn't have to find that. We would, but Petrojam pays over, after 90 days, 100% of the cost. We retain the government through Petrocaribe Development Fund, 40%. When the price goes to $100, then it's 50-50. And that's how it has been. When it falls below $50, it goes to 30-70. So it is the benefit that we get is in the financing arrangement. And as you know, we did mount a tremendous debt recently, and thankfully, again, to them, to their credit, we're able to pay it off on a 2-to-1 basis. Yes, we are distressed because and I'm not too sure if it's the current crisis, the current demonstrations that have resulted in the problem that we're facing in terms of short supplies. We have had this experience before, and what the Venezuelans have done, in 2015 we did go through a period when we weren't getting the supplies, but they made up for it because the refinery can produce more than just the 23,000 barrels a day.
But we weren't getting it in 2016 either, and now not in 2017. So for 2 years plus then.
Yes. I tell you, when we signed the agreement in 2005, I was warned as minister then to be cautious, and we need to be prepared for when it will not happen. And I've been to Venezuela many times, going through roadblocks. Unfortunately for the Venezuelan people, they have gone through this period of crisis for some time, and I really wish that it will be settled and the government of the day can be able to implement their policies and to, especially for us, see to the normalization of PetroCaribe. I do believe that it will be maintained. There does now appear to be a supply problem. My understanding is that it is going to be offset by a mixing of heavy and light crude to enable Jamaica to get its share.
I see Professor Williams raising his eyebrows when you say you believe it will be maintained. Why that reaction?
Well, let me say I share a number of the things that Mr. Powell said, but in terms of the maintenance of it, though, this is my own view that what happens if you recognize Venezuela would be giving up roughly about 5.3 million US dollars a day out of the 185,000 barrels of oil that they sell to all the PetroCaribe countries. If you were to take today's oil price at $48 a barrel, so they would be giving up roughly about $5.3 million a day. Now, Venezuela is in a serious situation where they need cash, and therefore I can't see going forward that they're going to continue with this arrangement when there's a situation that they actually need money right now. So there must be some rethinking of their arrangement, and importantly, if the opposition gets into government, that is where my fear is, because they did express concerns about revisiting the PetroCaribe agreement if they do come to government. But in the case of Jamaica, if you think about it, the challenge that we're going to have, as Mr. Powell just said, is that we'd have to find the full foreign exchange up front. Because what you do now is that you find only 40%, I think, is of it up front. So each day we would be finding something like 410,000 US. If we were to,
how much are we finding now under the agreement?
It should be about 410,000, 440,000 US. But
it's about 30% actually. It's about 30%.
It's about 30. So we are about
below $50.
So 30% of that number.
Yeah. Yes. So we should be 1.3 million, 1.1 million. So we're finding about 30% of that's about 300,000 US per day. So the issue for us is that we would have to now find the $1.1 million up front and pay that to the world market. So the challenge that you're going to have, as you know, Dennis, is that
the difference is really just the amount that is deferred.
Well, the difference would be the 700,000 US that you would have to find per day. That would now, that would now put serious pressure on the currency and on your reserves. And that is where I think the major impact is going to happen. So I don't see a major impact happening in terms of supply.
How much is that in relation to the amount of money that is traded daily now? Because that's how I look at it. An additional 700,000 on how much per day?
Well, thankfully, the price of oil is where it is at.
Yes.
Because I don't believe, based on the overall amount of funds that we trade, that it's going to be significant. What we need to be watching is when OPEC meets, I think they're meeting early next week
to see what happens to the price.
Right, because they are going to be cutting supplies. And my fear is that if that happens, the price will get closer to 60, and that's when we're going to be in for some.
Well, if it goes closer to 60, roughly finding something like 1.3 million US a day. I've also looked at that, per day.
Additional?
No, that would be additional, would be roughly about 900 per day if we go up to $60 a barrel.
60-40 then.
Yeah, 60-40 if it goes up to $60 a barrel.
Can we manage that? Because based on what we've been told about last year, we've already been finding lots of those funds up front because Venezuela just hasn't been able to meet the demand that we have so far in 2016. So is it really that big of a deal? Wouldn't we were able to find it last year, and you're not in government, Minister Powell, but you have an idea of where we are.
Yes, and normally the opposition will be the one
I called you Minister. Foreign Minister, sorry.
That's fine. Normally the opposition will be the one to scream and to create fear, but I believe that the situation is sustainable, especially because I'm also aware that the Venezuelans are trying to fulfill the requirements and that they are looking to enable us to recoup all of the the fuel that we have not gotten so far by way of this mixture, it appears as if the particular brand that we purchased from them is in short supply.
Yeah, but I mean, even with the best intention in the world, then there comes a point where Venezuela might just not be able to do it anymore.
And that's my point. My point is that even with the best intention in the world, they need cash.
Can you tell us what would be the breaking price point for Jamaica in terms of oil prices?
Well, I think anything over 60 is going to be a big challenge. 60 already is going to push you into some difficulties, but anything over that is going to be a big challenge for us. Thankfully, though, from all the studies that I have seen so far, it doesn't seem that we're going to go way past 60 anytime soon, especially with the developments in the United States. So even if OPEC cuts back, I think 60 is about a normal equilibrium price that they're going to be at for a while. So we should be planning for roughly around $60.
Yeah, I don't envisage that we're going to see $100.
No, I don't envisage that for any time.
So this year's budget is premised on oil prices of $47.50, I believe.
Yes, yes.
Right, and we're at 48 now. So
doesn't that have implications for the budget if the budget is premised on a particular oil price?
Only if they are able next week to succeed in effectively cutting supply. I believe that we'll be closer to 60 then, yes. But if that doesn't happen, then I think we're going to be hovering around it. The fact is that America now is a major player in the energy market. They effectively have been able to control supply and demand, and they're now exporting. So even if OPEC were to agree next week, I don't see the change coming for some time. I think we're going to be in this $50.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I don't think between now, we have how many months before the end of the fiscal year? Roughly about another 7 months before the end of the fiscal year. I don't think we're going to see that massive movement between 48 and 60.
Unless there's some geopolitical tension that might cause a problem.
Unless there is a major problem with Iran.
Yes.
I gather that there might be some escalation in Afghanistan.
What's happening in North Korea now could create a dislocation.
Of course, yes.
And what happened with Syria as well. And what even more nervous is the firing of James Comey today. That sends a signal that things may not be as stable as we think. So you're right, unless you have some extraordinary circumstances, we may reach the $60. But under normal circumstances, I don't think we will reach 60 before.
So what would be your advice, Philip, as a former minister to the government now to say, well, listen, this is what we should be planning for the worst case scenario?
Well, I think the government needs to focus on the project to upgrade the refinery, because very shortly when JPSCO goes to the 190 megawatt plant, which is going to be fueled by LNG, a significant market for Petrojam will be shut. To me, that is a more immediate issue for the government to be focused on. I am not seeing the swiftness in the negotiation that they did say that they were going to have with the Chinese company to start the refinery upgrade. The refinery upgrade is to expand the refinery from 30,000 barrels a day to 50,000 and to upgrade its efficiency so that it can produce more of the things that we use in Jamaica and to move away from heavy fuel oil, which is what JPSCO. But doesn't
Venezuela also have an interest in that upgrade?
Yes, but both partners will not be putting a dime into this project. What they'll be doing is to part with some shares to the Chinese company. So I believe that should be the focus now. Let us get that project done so that we'll be able to purchase crude anywhere. You can buy crude anywhere, albeit we might not have the protection of Petrocarib. But I think the value of the refinery being upgraded and expanded is quite clear.
But with the Chinese operations in Jamaica already under scrutiny for other projects, case in point, Highway 2000, don't you see that possibly slowing up the upgrade or slowing down?
No, I think there are different issues. The refinery, as I mentioned before, if we do not pursue that now, that refinery will probably have to shut in another couple of years when JPSCO will no longer need to purchase diesel or heavy fuel oil. The Chinese have come forward, and I gather that both companies came forward. They have selected one to finance the project on the basis of acquiring shares from both the companies.
When I say years, about how much time you estimate that they have left to before this.
No, they're going to run out of a market for heavy fuel oil and diesel by the time the 190 plant comes on stream.
Which is by 2018 or so.
2 years, I gather.
Yeah.
So they have to move quickly. And that is where I think, even though the Venezuelans are distracted, we really have to get them to focus on getting the expansion and upgrade done. That to me is far more critical than our focus on the current situation of not being supplied with the raw material.
Now, as you bring up the Chinese, though, former Minister Powell, Denzel, don't you see, lots of people are saying, how come the Chinese have their hands in so many things? Right. Pretty much all the major projects, or many of the major projects right now. Is that a legitimate cause for concern?
Well, the major thing is that cash is king. And the challenge that you have is that a lot of these investments require a significant amount of cash. And who has the cash at this time? The Chinese. So the question is, how do you put a governance structure in place to ensure that while you have a significant amount of cash pouring in, you still have a legitimate governance framework that is protecting you from corruption and all those types of things. And I think that is where the effort ought to be focused on. And I think all those persons need to come on board with better scrutiny, but at the same time be very mindful that you don't slow down the progress towards development. And I think that is a balancing act. I think that's a balancing act that you have to strike.
On this land issue, Dr. Phillips has come out and said that there actually was a valuation done.
Right.
So, you know, when I heard it, you know, I said that was ridiculous. Yes. I don't think that what was being said was correct.
Correct.
There's no way someone will sit down and two lawyers will decide that they're going to have a contract and the value, the consideration is not there.
Right.
So, you know,
if I could go back to the Chinese question, though, because it is true, they do have the resources. Take, for example, the project at Alpat. We were deliberate. I went out of my way to get a Chinese company here. Why? Because they have this insatiable appetite for aluminum. We produce the raw material. Many of the companies that were here were going out of business, Alcoa and so on. The Russians were not investing in Alpat because it was shut for 9 years. So we went out and we were able to assist in them negotiating a deal with the Russians. They are about to open the refinery next month, after being locked down for 9 years, which is remarkable. $300 million they purchased the assets for, and they're going to be investing $2 billion in the plant. It doesn't get any better than that.
Jobs coming back.
Jobs coming back, and our GDP will grow as a result.
But it has to be done. But it has to be done within the framework.
So Alpat is going to contribute largely to that.
We need to say something about this 5 and 4, though, Dennis and colleagues, because the truth is that we have to be very careful that we don't confuse or conflate big project investment with economic growth, as you would know. There are structural problems in Jamaica.
In terms of sustainability.
Exactly. So even if you have, more than most persons, we have seen significant investments through foreign direct investment up to the tune of $2 billion, and we have still not had any growth beyond 0.8%. So having all these projects on the ground is not going to give you that significant growth. What you need to do is a restructuring of the economy. So as you know, distributive trade contributes about 20% to GDP.
And crime alone is 4%.
And if you want the 5% growth, you're going to have to move that distributive trade from 20% of your economy to roughly about 5 or 7% and put it in more value added. Distributive trade, as you know, is just buying and selling. That is not going to bring value to the economy, so that needs to be done.
So we have about a little while left. So Philip, your view on the Petrocaribbean situation is nothing to be overly concerned about.
Right. If there's a change in government, I believe it will be shut down. Yes, I believe that, and they have said so time and time again. The opposition will cut it. So what we need to do is to prepare for any eventuality. I do wish, again, the government of Venezuela well, but the focus now should be on the refinery upgrade project. Let us get that done so that we can meet the 2019 date when JPSCo will no longer be purchasing.
And you have any last comment?
The real issue is that if there's a change in government, I don't think we're going to see Petrocaribbean. So the issue is how are you going to diversify away from Petrocaribbean?
So what's the outcome?
Yeah, things are tense in Venezuela, so we're all watching. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Paulwell, Professor Williams. When we come back, we will be talking financing tertiary education. Stay with us. Welcome back. How do we make tertiary education more affordable and available to Jamaicans? Well, that's been a very big issue recently, with several people weighing in on the debate. The government's decision to bail out some college students has been met with mixed reactions, while at least one UWI campus is raising fees. Here's more.
It's a constant cry every academic year. Students unable to meet their financial obligation to the University of the West Indies and, to a lesser extent, UTEC, begging for leniency or a way to take their final examination and a payment plan worked out. Years ago, the University of the West Indies moved to deregister and bar students owing outstanding tuition fees from sitting final exams. This year, over 1,500 students were in arrears and were facing being barred from sitting exams. Among this number were hundreds of final year students who pleaded to the government for assistance. The Education Ministry said some 329 final year students owed the university $45 million. In light of this, the government announced that it would provide $9 million in grants to some final year students of the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies who were barred from sitting final year examinations because of outstanding fees owed to the university. Other students received fast-tracked loans from the Students' Loan Bureau to help settle their debts.
And we're joined now by Principal of UWI Mona, Professor Archibald McDonald, and we're also joined by the Director at the School of Academic Studies at Caribbean Maritime Institute, CMI, Ibrahim Ajaguna. My apologies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, welcome. Professor, let me start with you. You said that the recent move by the government to pay the fees is a bailout. Why do you say that? Obviously, you're not discounting tertiary education, but there's a reason why you say it's a bailout.
Well, first, let me applaud. Let me say I applaud the minister and the Jamaican government for trying to assist or finalizing students. But this certainly is not sustainable because you can't have a system where every year at this time of the year when we are having final exams, students go to the Ministry of Education and to their political representatives to be bailed out. That is not a sustainable system. So whereas I applaud the minister and the government for allowing our students to take their final exams, let me tell you that there is nobody more sympathetic to the poor in our society than me, but somebody has to pay for education. Education is not free.
It teaches them the wrong values too.
That is another aspect. I do know that the minister has some thoughts about how this can be dealt with going forward, because he knows that even as we applaud him this year, that next year he has to find a more sustainable solution to that problem.
But the way he's explained it, it's not. This was something that was already in train even before these finalizing students complained about being barred from exams. This is something that they've planned for and that they're going to do again next year, and so it's not necessarily a bailout the way he's explained it.
No, let us not necessarily use the word bailout. He came to the assistance of the students, but I believe it's a reaction to the request from the students bombarding the Ministry of Education and articulating their problems to officers of the ministry, and this was a response to the appeal from the students.
Over at the CMI, do you have this type of issue with because we tend to hear about it from UWI all the time, pretty much every year, but I don't recall hearing this issue at the CMI. Perhaps it just hasn't gone public, but do you experience this there as well?
Well, actually, it's a problem across all tertiary institutions and across Jamaica. However, we find a creative way of dealing with this type of issue. We do not bar students from taking their final examinations. What we do, mainly through the creative way that my executive director, Dr. Fritz Pinnock, seek funding for students who are unable to afford is through private partnership. Because at CMI, we work from the industry in creating our curriculum. So we create curriculum that is relevant. So you find that the majority of our stakeholders, they come to the aid of our students. And in many instances also, we raise funds from individual. Dr. Pinnock will sit in office, call somebody like Dennis and say, I have a child here, and I cannot send this child out of school. Can you assist with his school fees? It is not free for all. We know education cannot be free, but we have to find a creative way to get our youth to go through tertiary education.
Well, you're a much smaller institution than UWI, so you can take that type of personalized approach.
Yes. Well, let me jump in here, because the fact is that 3 years ago, when I became principal, the policy at UWI was to bar students from taking exams for financial reasons. That proved to be an administrative nightmare. And I also thought that it was unfair to the students, having studied for an entire semester. When they went to the exam room, they were barred. So I worked with our senior management team to change that policy. So that policy no longer exists at Mona.
In the past, students have been barred.
In the past, students have been barred.
Any complaints?
Well, they always complain.
No, I mean the national spotlight.
Well, without so much national outcry.
Perhaps they didn't make as much noise in the past.
But the question is, why then did we bar students this year? Because what we found was that students graduated, got employment, and just did not even return, did not pay the fees, and did not return for their certificates and transcripts. So we have
So they didn't care about their grades?
I don't know. I think they find some creative ways to get the information which they need, because so we have a room full of transcripts and certificates unclaimed by students. So what student receivables now stand at $2.5 billion with a B. $2.5 billion is what students owe the institution. We, like CMI, we have also used creativity. We funded students last year, needy students, $850 million in the form of scholarships, bursaries, and even meals. So we are doing that. We, in all the partnerships, some of which have been maligned in the media, but in all the partnerships, big and small, that we sign at the university, and we sign them now every day. Every day we're signing MOUs, and every MOU has built-in scholarships and bursaries for students. That is built into almost every MOU. So we are trying to help students, I think.
And I don't know if I can take that further in respect of the Caribbean Maritime Institute. We are not only using creative way in bringing or in begging for people to finance students' tuition. We also use the students themselves in community projects. If you look at, if you travel on the Palisades, you find that you have a different street light. It is CMI that retrofitted those lights, and we use the services of our students. And we don't pay them. Whatever we need to pay them goes into their school fees. Yes, we also have a project on alternative energy. We use the services of our students. If they cannot afford the fee, they must be able to do something
so like a work scholarship.
Work scholarship, yes. We also have the work and learn on campus, where students go to take jobs in the library, security, record keeper, work in the cafeteria, and we.
But you also have that on.
Absolutely, yes.
But you're saying the issue are the really delinquent students who just don't care, eh?
Yeah, well, let me say that there are some genuine needy students. There are needy students who just cannot afford to pay. But they are at the same time there are students who do not want to pay, and they refuse to take student loan. Thank God they are not in the majority, but those are needy students who are bailed out. Pardon me? Those are the ones who were. Well, some of them were bailed out. Well, let me give you some numbers, and you can be the judge of that. When the discussion started, there were over 1,500 students on the list, which went to the Ministry of Education. Over about 5 days, that dropped to 200 students. So students came in and paid.
Okay.
The students came in.
Most of them.
Most of them, the vast majority, dropping from over 1,300 of them came and paid their fees. So the problem is just the 200 then? Well, yes, and those are the ones which will now get assistance from the. Well, they got it already because they're taking their exams. Assistance from the Ministry of Education. Those 200 are the ones who are not necessarily the real needy issues, but people who just don't want to pay. That's what you're saying. Not necessarily the most needy. Not necessarily. Yeah, but people who just don't have a nonchalant attitude. Well, I'm sure that some of them would fall into that category. But if we broaden the discussion a little bit, because the question is, how do we make education, tertiary education, affordable?
Yes,
that's
the broader question.
That's a broader question. But the reason why I ask that, Professor, is because even if you make it affordable, if someone don't want to pay, they just won't pay. Right, there would be. And that's the issue. Yeah. And that is why what you're saying about the example that's been set is a bad example, and we have to find a more sustainable and a more responsible way. Right, there has to be. We need a cultural shift, and we are doing that because we are registered with the Credit Bureau. So if you're delinquent, then the information will be shared with the Credit Bureau. So hopefully over time, students and their parents will understand the need to pay fees as you do your utility bills and so on. But in terms of making education more affordable, because Jamaica and the Caribbean have the lowest enrollment in tertiary education in the Western Hemisphere. Trinidad and Barbados are ahead of us. We are down at 10%. We really should be up above 30%. We are about only 10% of the age group, I believe, between 18 and 30 is enrolled in a tertiary institution. And
is that primarily because of cost, or is it other factors?
Partly because of cost. Partly because of cost, partly because of we have 70% of our children leaving secondary school without a subject. Well, absolutely. That's a big contribution. That is a factor.
So then part of it is that they just don't qualify to get in academically.
But that is making the case for not shifting money from secondary to tertiary, because the government has a responsibility to ensure that our students at least get a decent secondary education. There's a primary and secondary. And for them to fund tertiary at the levels which, let me be frank, some of my colleagues would like to see, they would have to shift money from somewhere. And if the minister was here, he will tell you they would have to shift from those areas into tertiary. So it is my view that a new system is needed to fund tertiary education unless we solve our economic problems very, very quickly, which won't happen for a number of years. So I do know that the Prime Minister himself articulated a position last week at the university, but he's going to have to find some mechanism through the Student Loan Bureau for students to be able to access loans, and I fully support that position, because the funding has to be found, has to come from somewhere. So I believe he will develop this in the months to come, and I look forward to that.
Well, Mr. Ajaguna, what are your thoughts on the funding of it? Should it be more and we're looking big picture here. Should it be more government-led or more private sector loan-led? So getting more from the Students' Loan Bureau, getting more private sector loans involved? Or should the government play a greater role in financing tertiary education?
I think I agree with Archibald. All he has just advanced in the but the important thing is that we need to begin to ask of the relevance of the type of degree that students are getting from the universities. And that is very, very critical, because even if the private sector knows that you're not going to be employable at the end of your program, they will not invest. But I agree that there should be a partnership between the government and the private sector, because we're actually creating that labor for the private sector.
But it's not something that the government should do. The government should incentivize education that they're going to need for the economic development. And then the ones that, if you want to go, and as I always say, if you want to study the DNA of a raindrop, and it has nothing to do with our development, you go and find your own funding.
The fact remains that even if loan is made available to the student, there are some that cannot still afford the loan, because you need a collateral, either from your parents, from whatever source, even including the Student Loan Bureau. But many students cannot have access to a Student Loan Bureau because they cannot find qualified guarantors.
But the point is that if you target certain courses which are relevant in the future, the government could maybe provide that collateral on behalf of those students.
That is the point I was making. That is where government should invest its money, not programs that a student finish 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they cannot find a job.
So why do institutions like UWI continue to offer these programs that don't offer any reasonable job prospects?
Well, I believe that we are educators, and our responsibility, yes, we have taken the necessary steps to align our programs to industry and our research to industry, but we also have a responsibility to educate the young people, young and older persons as well.
Choose to migrate,
Absolutely. And therefore, there are some areas which I've come to respect tremendously, and areas in the humanities, like history and so on. Those are critical areas which develop critical thinking skills and so on. So I would hate to see the day where those areas are completely ignored. We cannot do that. We are educators, right? And we end up having a population which is uneducated. But I do agree that the government should incentivize certain areas like engineering. Thank God we have an engineering faculty in Jamaica now, because that is part of the reason for our underdevelopment, the fact that we did not have engineering at the Mona campus, and we were producing 2 and 3. Well, there's UTech, but we should have been supporting UTech a long time ago. So that is changing. So I fully agree that there are some areas the government should incentivize to make sure we have those skills available.
And the ones that we don't see as critical to economic development, then the students should fund that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Fund those, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. But the mechanism has to be worked out by the government and the Ministry of Education. And they can do that. It's not difficult.
We have to figure it out. I see UWI Cave Hill raising fees for the first time in a few years. Similar increases coming at Mona?
No, there's no increase at Mona. You should ask why. Because of what we are doing. Because all these private-public partnerships, what they are doing is apart from stabilizing the finances at Mona. Years ago, Mona was in trouble financially. We have the finances have now been stabilized, and more importantly, we are saving a lot of money by these projects. So water, we're saving $10 million per month. Because with the cogen plant, we're saving $250 million. Per $1 billion every year we're saving on the cogen plant. And also all our private, what we have done is to embrace the private sector in a way never seen before. And the private sector has come on board on the Mona campus, and they're investing heavily. So the net effect of that, is that we have what we have done is to drive the cost down so much so that this year there is no need to raise fees at Mona.
Well, that's good news.
But KV is struggling, so they had to raise fees.
Well, thanks for joining us. Oh, you have a last word?
Well, why that is the case with the University of West Indies, I think they are better placed now than the Caribbean Maritime Institute, in the sense that we are a young institution. We are just growing. We came from 450 students in 2006 to 4,000 approximately students now. We have overgrown our capacity. So we definitely need funding in the area of capital development from the government.
So maybe you should make a similar appeal for a bailout from the Ministry of Education.
Well, I think in fact the Prime Minister recently announced, and that was at a conference in Montego Bay, recognizing that CMI has overgrown its current capacity, and there is the need for relocation or to seek a new campus for the institution. So we really need the assistance of the government, especially in infrastructural development.
Definitely a conversation we need to continue to shed some light on and focus on. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Aja Guna, and also Professor McDonald. When we come back, we'll have the numbers and your word on the street. Welcome back to On Point. Well, oil imports under Petrocaribe have dramatically declined as Venezuela faces political and economic crisis and turmoil. Here are the numbers.
Jamaica's total demand for oil is 14.3 million barrels a year. Under Petrocaribe, Jamaica can access about 60% of that with concessionary financing from Venezuela. That's between 7 and 8 million barrels a year. But State Minister for Finance Favour Williams recently revealed that in 2016, Jamaica imported only 1 million barrels of oil from Venezuela. And this year, that's about to fall to just 500,000 barrels. This forces Jamaica to pay the full cost up front for the bulk of the oil bought on the world market. West Texas Intermediate oil was trading at $47.81 a barrel on a Thursday. This means Jamaica had to find an additional $300 million to pay for oil up front last year. That number is expected to increase to about $330 million this year as imports from Venezuela dwindle even further.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked Jamaicans, what do you think can be done to make tertiary education more available and affordable?
I don't know about affordability, but I believe students ought to work while they're studying to help to, pay their fees. In Europe and in America, you work, you do any part-time job as a student.
I think probably what we need are more quality tertiary spaces available to the public. I think as it is now, yes, we're having an increasing number of tertiary spaces, but the perception. So some institutions may not be perceived as good enough, and we need more quality and hence more competition, and that will drive down the price to individuals.
There can be an arrangement in place where a small percentage of the profits from large corporations, especially banks, could be set aside in a certain pool of funds as a part of the contribution. When you look at the tertiary level, that's where you really gain value in terms of the education needs of the country. The tertiary institution produce graduates that come and contribute to economic development.
Well, then it's a lot to keep our eyes on, especially Venezuela right now. All the things going on there, it's like every day there's a new development.
Yeah, and they don't seem, our guests didn't seem overly concerned about the present situation, but the fact is that, as I said, it can change. And if it changes, which is very likely now, because I think Maduro is under some serious pressure there.
Intense pressure.
And if it changes and Venezuela needs the money, $5.3 million a day extra cash with the good pocket change for them. I mean, given all the shortages they have there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even our guests this evening recognized that changes right now looking like an option is not as far-fetched as it was 5 years ago or as far-fetched as it was under Chavez when PetroCaribe was signed. Change is looking now like something that may very well happen.
Yeah, and Maduro, even from the start, wasn't as firm as Chavez in terms of his support. I think he's still living on the legacy of Chavez in many respects, and therefore it's a very fragile situation. So what our government should be doing is doing some real risk analysis and determining, what's the worst case scenario, and ensuring that we have a plan to deal with that if it happens.
But the good news for us is that we're not in the position that we were 10 years ago.
And
oil isn't $100 a barrel anymore. It's closer to 50.
Yeah,
and we also have the IMF standby arrangement should something like that.
And also our energy mix is a lot more diversified now, particularly come next year.
With LNG.
LNG and all of that. So we're not, I don't think it's a present danger. It's a real danger, but not a present one right now. Maybe in another 2 years or so. By that time, we should have been able to have dealt with it.
Yeah, it's something that we can survive, fortunately, and that's the good news for us. But we do need to keep our eyes on oil prices, as Denzel was telling us, because $60 a barrel, it could happen this year. We don't know.
Well, it depends on the geopolitical tension. Outside of that, I don't think it's going to go there, because the U.S., as he said, is a huge producer now. So I don't think it's going to go there. The bigger issue for us is really maybe the second discussion. That might have a more immediate impact on us. Because the truth is that I don't think that we're creating enough of an educated class. We still have too low skill sets in our labor force. You'd have seen the article last week where it said that employers are actually looking for people and can't find people to employ. And that is a huge problem for economic growth in the country.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us yet another week here on Point. We appreciate your presence, your eyes, your views, and tell a friend to watch us next time as well. On behalf of our hardworking production team, I'm Kalila Reynolds.
And I'm Dennis Chung. Until next week.
On Point was brought to you by National Baking Company.